Dear viewers, today we bring you a story that will leave you breathless and make you question everything you believe about power, survival, and redemption. A struggling young black maid from Newark married an 85-year-old Korean Mafia boss, but just 7 days after their courthouse wedding, when she arrived at the crime lord's fortress-like Greenwich mansion to fulfill the dark terms of their arrangement, what she discovered was beyond imagination. The way this elderly man moved, with the cold precision of a trained assassin, his eyes burning with calculated intensity, and his presence commanding fear from everyone around him, made him appear no different from a dangerous man in his prime. But the real shock came when Indigo made a decision that nobody saw coming. Indigo's alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., dragging her from the 3 hours of sleep she'd managed to steal. Her body ached in places she didn't know existed. Knees throbbing from kneeling on marble floors, hands raw from chemical burns that the cheap gloves couldn't prevent, and a persistent pain in her lower back that had become her constant companion. She dragged herself out of the worn mattress on the floor of their South Ward apartment, the same apartment where roaches scattered when she turned on the kitchen light, where the heat barely worked in winter, and where every creak in the floorboards reminded her of how far her family had fallen. By 6 a.m., she was on her knees in a Manhattan penthouse that cost more per month than her family would see in 5 years, scrubbing a toilet that probably cost more than her father's funeral. The woman who owned this palace walked past her twice, designer heels clicking on Italian marble, and never once looked down. To people like her, Indigo didn't exist. She was just part of the furniture, another tool used to maintain their pristine lives. The invisibility burned worse than the chemicals eating away at her skin. Her father, Nathaniel, had died 6 months ago, collapsed at his desk at 52 years old. The doctors called it a massive heart attack brought on by chronic stress and untreated hypertension, the kind of death sentence that stalks black men who work themselves into early graves trying to provide for their families. He'd left behind exactly $347 in his checking account, a pile of medical bills, and 3 women who didn't know how they'd survive without him. The life insurance policy he'd promised existed turned out to be a lie he'd told to make them feel secure. There was nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because the funeral costs had put them another $8,000 in debt. Her mother Essence needed $4,000 every single month just to stay alive. Lupus had ravaged her body for years, but now her kidneys were failing and she needed dialysis 3 times a week. The insurance company had denied coverage, claiming her condition was pre-existing, even though she'd been paying premiums for a decade. Without treatment, the doctors said she had maybe 6 months. With treatment they couldn't afford, maybe a few years. Indigo did the math every night, lying awake in the dark, trying to figure out how to steal time from death itself. Then there was Kaya, her baby sister, the smart one, the one who was supposed to make it out. Spelman College had given her a partial scholarship, but partial still meant $18,000 a year that they didn't have. The bursar's office had sent 3 letters in the past 2 weeks. The last one was clear. Pay the $12,000 balance in 30 days or Kaya would be withdrawn from classes. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of Kaya maintaining a 3.8 GPA, 3 years of hope, all of it about to disappear because they were $12,000 short of a miracle. So Indigo had done what desperate people do. She'd taken out loans. Not from banks. Banks didn't give loans to broke black girls from Newark, but from the predators who circled neighborhoods like hers. 5 different payday loan companies, each charging interest rates that should be illegal. 400% APR. The math was designed to drown you. She owed $47,000 now on loans that had originally been $12,000. The interest compounded daily, growing like cancer. The collection calls started at 6 a.m. and didn't stop until midnight. Different voices, same threats. We know where your mother lives. We'll garnish her disability checks. Legal action will be taken. One collector had actually shown up at Essence's dialysis center, demanding payment while her mother was hooked up to machines keeping her alive. Indigo worked for a cleaning service that took 70% of what clients paid, leaving her with scraps. When Mr. Harrison in the Upper East Side penthouse cornered her in his bedroom last week, pressing himself against her and whispering what he wanted to do, she'd reported it to her supervisor. The response? "Mr. Harrison is a valued client. Maybe you misunderstood his intentions. We can't afford to lose his account." The message was clear. Her body, her safety, her dignity, none of it mattered. She was 25 years old but felt 50. Every morning she looked in the mirror and saw her mother's exhausted eyes staring back at her. Her youth wasn't slipping away. It had been stolen, sacrificed on the altar of survival. The final blow came on a Tuesday. The collection agency called while she was scrubbing someone's bathtub. "Ms. Sterling, we've begun proceedings to garnish your mother's Social Security disability payments. You have 48 hours to pay $15,000 or the order goes through." That night, Indigo sat on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay, listening to her mother's labored breathing in the next room, and realized she was out of options. She was drowning, and there was no one coming to save her. That's when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "There is another way. Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m., outside Kim's BBQ on Ferry Street. Come alone. YH." That night, at 8 p.m., Indigo stood outside Kim's BBQ on Ferry Street in Newark's Ironbound district. She'd just finished a side job, washing and detailing the owner's Lexus LS 500H for an extra $40 she desperately needed. Her hands still smelled like car wax and leather cleaner, and exhaustion sat on her shoulders like a physical weight. The mysterious text had given no other information, just a time and place. She should have been more cautious, but caution was a luxury for people who had options. She had none. The street was quiet for a Tuesday evening, the kind of unsettling quiet that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Korean families walked past with takeout bags. A few teenagers loitered near the corner store, life continuing in its mundane rhythm. Then she heard them, the low rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving in formation. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows turned onto Ferry Street, moving with the kind of precision that suggested military training or something far more sinister. The casual pedestrians scattered. The teenagers disappeared into shadows. Suddenly, the street was empty except for Indigo, standing alone under a flickering streetlight with $40 in her pocket and nowhere to run. The vehicles stopped in perfect synchronization, forming a semicircle that blocked any easy escape route. Car doors opened simultaneously, and men in expensive suits emerged, 6 of them, moving like a choreographed unit. They weren't security guards from any legitimate company Indigo had ever seen. These men had the hard eyes and economical movements of people who'd done violence and would do it again without hesitation. One of them swept the perimeter with his gaze, his hand resting casually inside his jacket in a way that made Indigo's stomach drop. These men were armed, and they didn't care who knew it. They wanted people to know it. Then the rear door of the center SUV opened, and Kim Young-hee stepped out. He was 85 years old, according to any official record, but the man who emerged from that vehicle moved with an unsettling grace that defied every assumption about elderly men. Tall and lean, dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Indigo made in a year, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made emperors and presidents look like children playing dress-up. His silver-white hair was swept back from a face that was lined with age but sharp as broken glass. Angular, severe, unforgiving. His skin had the pallor of someone who avoided sunlight, and his hands, when they emerged from his pockets, were elegant but marked with old scars that suggested a violent past. But it was his eyes that made Indigo's blood run cold. Dark, penetrating, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen everything humanity had to offer and had been disappointed every single time. Eyes that had watched people beg, watched people die, and felt nothing. He looked at her, and Indigo felt stripped bare, examined, assessed. It wasn't the lascivious look she'd learned to recognize and dodge from men like Mr. Harrison. This was different, clinical, calculating, like a scientist studying an insect pinned to a board, like someone evaluating livestock before purchase. "You are Indigo Sterling, yes?" His English was perfect, touched with only the faintest Korean accent that made certain consonants sharper than an American would make them. His voice was cultured, refined, the kind of voice that belonged in corporate boardrooms or at diplomatic functions. But there was something underneath it, something cold and ancient and dangerous. Indigo's throat went dry. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. "How do you know my name?" He smiled, but the expression never reached those black ice eyes. It was the smile of a predator who'd already decided you were prey. "I know everything, Miss Sterling. I know your mother Essence has missed 3 dialysis appointments in the past 2 weeks because you cannot afford the copays. I know your sister Kaya received her final notice from Spelman College yesterday. Pay $12,000 in 30 days or she loses everything. I know you owe $47,000 to 7 different payday loan companies, each one charging interest rates that compound daily like cancer." He paused, taking a step closer. "I know about the man in the Upper East Side penthouse who put his hands on you last Tuesday. I know exactly where he touched you, and I know your employer did absolutely nothing when you reported it." Terror flooded through Indigo's body, cold and paralyzing. This man knew things that no one should know. Private things, shameful things. The kind of detailed surveillance that suggested he'd been watching her family for weeks, maybe months. "Who are you?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "What do you want from me?" "What I want," he said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate in a way that felt like a threat wrapped in velvet, "is to offer you a transaction. A business arrangement that will solve every problem currently destroying your life." He let that hang in the air, watching her process it. "Marry me, Miss Sterling. Become my wife, and every debt disappears, not paid off slowly, erased, completely, immediately. Your mother will receive the finest medical care available anywhere in this country. I own interests in 3 private hospitals in Manhattan. Your sister will graduate from Spelman debt-free with a guaranteed position at any Fortune 500 company I choose. And you—" his gaze traveled over her with that same clinical assessment. "You will never scrub another stranger's toilet, never deliver food in dangerous neighborhoods at midnight, never worry about money or survival again." The offer was so absurd, so completely insane, that Indigo almost laughed. A hysterical giggle tried to escape her throat but died when she met his eyes again. He wasn't joking. "Why would you—" "I don't understand. What would I have to do?" His expression shifted, something predatory flickering behind those cold eyes, something that made her skin crawl with primitive warning. "Be my wife. Legally. Completely. Sign the papers. Take my name. Live in my home. Move into my world." He paused, and the silence stretched like razor wire. There are certain expectations that come with marriage, obligations that must be fulfilled, terms that must be honored. The way he said obligations made Indigo's skin crawl. There was something in his tone, not lust exactly, but something darker, more deliberate, more terrifying. This wasn't a lonely old man looking for companionship. This wasn't even a rich man looking for a trophy wife. This was something else entirely, something calculated and cold and deeply wrong. "This is not charity, Miss Sterling," he continued, his voice taking on an edge that made clear this was not a negotiation. "This is business, pure transaction. I get what I need. You get what you need. Everyone benefits. Simple economics." He tilted his head slightly, studying her like a chess master, considering his opponent's next 3 moves. "You have 48 hours to decide. Not 49, not 72. 48. He reached into his jacket, one of his guards tensed, hand moving toward his weapon until he recognized the gesture, and pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, the kind of paper that whispered money and power with gold lettering that caught the streetlight. Kim Young-hee, with a phone number and nothing else. No title, no company name, just a name and a number for people who already knew who he was. He held it out to her, and when she took it with trembling fingers, his hand briefly touched hers. His skin was ice cold, and there was a thin scar across his knuckles that looked like it came from a knife. 48 hours, Miss Sterling. Then the offer expires, and you return to your previous life. Such as it is. He turned and walked back to the SUV with that same fluid, unsettling grace, the walk of a man who'd never had to fear anything in his life because he was the thing other people feared. His men moved in formation, returning to their vehicles with military precision. As the convoy prepared to leave, Indigo noticed movement in the restaurant's doorway. The owner of Kim's BBQ was standing there, and he was bowing, deep, reverent, the kind of bow that spoke of absolute submission. The cook beside him had his head lowered, refusing to even look at the vehicles. Every employee visible through the window had stopped what they were doing and assumed postures of deference and fear. One woman had her hands pressed together as if in prayer. These people knew who Kim Young-hee was, and they were absolutely terrified of him. As the SUVs disappeared into the Newark night, Indigo stood alone on Ferry Street, holding a business card that felt like a contract with the devil, and wondering what kind of monster she'd just met. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another debt collector, and she looked down at the card in her hand. The gold lettering seemed to glow in the streetlight, and for just a moment she let herself imagine it. No more scrubbing toilets, no more watching her mother suffer, no more watching Kaya's dreams die. Just 48 hours to decide if she was willing to sell her soul for it. Indigo didn't sleep that night. She sat on the worn couch in their South Ward apartment, staring at Kim Young-hee's business card until the gold lettering blurred in her vision. 48 hours. The words echoed in her mind like a death sentence countdown. Around 2 a.m. she finally closed her eyes, the card still clutched in her hand. The pounding on the door came at 6:30 a.m. 3 sharp knocks, too aggressive to be a neighbor, too early to be legitimate. Indigo's heart jumped into her throat as she stumbled to the door, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Through the peephole she saw 2 men in suits, but these weren't Young-hee's polished, military-precise soldiers. These men looked like what they were. Enforcers from the payday loan companies, the kind who did the dirty work when phone calls stopped working. She opened the door with the chain still on. "What do you want?" The taller one smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Indigo had ever seen. "Miss Sterling, we represent several creditors who are very concerned about your outstanding debts." He pushed against the door, not hard enough to break the chain, but hard enough to make his point. "We need to come in and have a conversation." "I don't have to let you in." "No, you don't." The shorter one pulled back his jacket just enough to show the gun holstered at his hip, not drawing it, not threatening overtly, just letting her know it was there. "But we're going to have this conversation one way or another." Her hands shook as she undid the chain. They walked in like they owned the place, their eyes cataloging everything, the old television, the furniture, what little jewelry her mother had on the dresser, calculating what could be taken, what could be sold. "Here's the situation," the tall one said, not bothering to sit. "You owe our clients a combined total of $47,000. That number grows every day. Your payment history shows a pattern of delinquency that's no longer acceptable." He stepped closer, invading her space. "You have 72 hours to pay $15,000. Just 15. We're being generous. If you don't, we start taking things that matter." "I don't have $15,000. I don't have $1,500. "Then you better find it, because after 72 hours, we stop being nice." His smile widened. "We know where your mother goes for dialysis. We know where your sister lives at Spellman. Shame if something happened to interrupt their routines." They left, and the threat hung in the air like poison gas. An hour later, Essence collapsed in the kitchen. One moment she was standing at the sink. The next she was on the floor, her skin ashen, her breathing labored. Indigo called 911, rode in the ambulance, watched the EMTs work with practiced efficiency. At the hospital, they stabilized her mother quickly. Too quickly, Indigo would realize later. They weren't really trying to treat her. They were just making sure she didn't die in the waiting room. "Your mother has missed multiple dialysis appointments," the ER doctor said, his voice flat and rehearsed, like he'd given this speech 1,000 times. "Her potassium levels are dangerously high. She needs immediate admission for emergency dialysis and monitoring." "Okay, admit her." "Ma'am, your mother's insurance has lapsed. We'll need a deposit of $2,000 before we can admit her to the floor." Indigo felt the world tilt. "She'll die without treatment. We've stabilized her for now, but without payment we can only provide emergency care. I'm sorry." He didn't look sorry. He looked tired of poor people and their impossible situations. They sent Essence home with instructions to follow up with her regular nephrologist and a prescription for medications they couldn't afford. Indigo half-carried her mother back to their apartment, and the weight of her, so light now, so fragile from the illness eating her alive, made Indigo want to scream. Her phone rang as she was settling Essence into bed. Kaya's name lit up the screen, and Indigo almost didn't answer. She couldn't take more bad news. She couldn't. "Indy?" Kaya's voice was thick with tears. "They're kicking me out. The dean's office just sent security to my dorm room. I have to be off campus in 3 days, or they're calling the police. They said if I don't pay the balance by Friday, they're revoking my scholarship permanently, not just this semester, forever. Kaya, just give me a minute to think. There's nothing to think about." Her sister's voice broke completely. "It's over. 3 years, everything I worked for, it's just over. I'm coming home, Indy. I'm so sorry. I really tried. Don't come home." Indigo heard herself say the words, but they felt like they were coming from someone else. "Stay there. I'm fixing this." She ended the call before Kaya could respond. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. She looked at her mother, sleeping fitfully in the next room, dying by inches because they couldn't afford to keep her alive. She thought about Kaya, packing her things in her dorm room, 3 years of dreams collapsing. She thought about those men with their guns and their threats and their 72-hour deadline, and she looked at Kim Young-hee's business card. The number rang twice before a woman answered in Korean, then switched to English. "Mr. Kim's office. This is Indigo Sterling. I need to speak with him. One moment." Young-hee's voice came on the line, and it sounded almost amused. "Miss Sterling, I wasn't expecting to hear from you quite so soon." "I accept." Her voice sounded dead even to her own ears. "Your offer. I accept." "Wise decision. Someone will come for you tomorrow morning at 9. Bring nothing. Everything you need will be provided." Within 24 hours, Indigo's world transformed with the brutal efficiency of money wielded without conscience. The debts disappeared, not paid off gradually, but erased, every collection agency suddenly silent. Essence was admitted to a private facility in Manhattan, the kind of place with marble floors and original artwork, where every nurse smiled and the dialysis machines looked like they belonged on a spaceship. Kaya called, sobbing with relief, saying the university had called her personally to apologize for the clerical error, and that her full scholarship was not only reinstated but expanded. The wedding took place 3 days later at Fairfield County Courthouse in Connecticut. No press, no announcement, just a quiet civil ceremony. But the people in attendance made Indigo's blood run cold. She recognized faces from the news: a federal judge, 2 Connecticut state senators, a tech CEO she'd seen on magazine covers. People who looked like they owned things, important things, dangerous things. Young He stood beside her in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and when the justice of the peace asked him to recite his vows, his words were beautiful. Poetic, even. Words about partnership and devotion. About 2 souls finding each other against all odds. His voice was warm and sincere, and if you only listened to the words, you'd think this was a love story. But Indigo made the mistake of looking at his eyes. They were ice. Calculation. Triumph that looked like victory in a war she hadn't known they were fighting. Behind them, one guest, a silver-haired woman in Chanel, leaned over to whisper to the man beside her. "Poor girl has no idea what she's walked into." The man murmured back, 40 years he's waited. 40 years. Indigo's pen shook as she signed the marriage certificate. Indigo Sterling became Indigo Kim with a few strokes of ink, her identity legally bound to this man she didn't know, this stranger with ice in his eyes and secrets that seemed to fill the room. Young He signed his name with the elegant precision of someone who'd signed many documents, many contracts, many deals that changed people's lives. He stood, offered her his hand, and when she took it, he pulled her close. To anyone watching, it looked like an embrace. Romantic. Tender. His mouth was near her ear when he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Kim. I've waited 40 years for this day. 40 years to have what was stolen from me." His hand tightened on hers. Not quite painful, but absolutely controlling. "Your mother took everything from me once. Now I have her daughter. The circle is complete." He pulled back, smiled at her with warmth that didn't reach his eyes, and kissed her forehead like a loving husband. And Indigo realized, with absolute clarity and complete terror, that she hadn't been saved at all. She'd been purchased for a purpose she didn't yet understand. The drive from the courthouse to Greenwich took 45 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another country. The landscape changed gradually, urban sprawl giving way to manicured suburbs, then to estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. The SUV turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet call box, and Indigo watched as 12-foot walls topped with sophisticated security equipment came into view. This wasn't a home. This was a fortress. The gates opened silently, responding to some unseen signal, and they drove through onto grounds that looked like they belonged to a European embassy. Armed guards in tactical gear stood at strategic positions, not even pretending to be regular security. These men carried automatic weapons and wore earpieces, sweeping the perimeter with eyes that never stopped moving. Surveillance cameras dotted every corner, every angle, overlapping fields of vision that would capture everything, everyone, all the time. The mansion itself was breathtaking in the way that glaciers are breathtaking, beautiful, imposing, and utterly cold. Modern architecture blended with classical elements, all sharp angles and cold stone and windows that reflected the sky like mirrors, revealing nothing of what lay inside. It looked like a place where warmth came to die. Young He had ridden in a separate vehicle. He emerged from the lead car and gestured for her to follow without a word, walking toward the entrance with that same unsettling grace. The front doors, massive slabs of reinforced steel disguised as elegant wood, opened as they approached, operated by someone Indigo couldn't see. Inside was worse. The foyer was 3 stories tall, dominated by a chandelier that probably cost more than most houses, but the space felt dead, museum-like. Everything was perfectly placed, perfectly clean, perfectly untouched. White marble floors reflected everything like ice. Modern art hung on walls, pieces Indigo vaguely recognized from the few times she'd seen wealthy clients' magazines, but they were displayed like trophies, not treasures. Nothing here suggested anyone actually lived in this space. It was a mausoleum for the living. Staff moved through the halls with military precision, and Indigo realized with creeping horror that they weren't typical household workers. They moved like soldiers, economical, alert, dangerous. Men and women both, mostly Korean, all of them carrying themselves with the bearing of people who'd seen combat. When they saw Young Hee, they bowed slightly and addressed him in Korean, titles Indigo didn't understand but recognized as deeply respectful, the kind of respect born from fear rather than affection. A young woman approached, the only person who seemed remotely human in this place. She was beautiful, maybe 24, with dark skin and careful eyes that suggested East African heritage. She wore professional attire but moved with a wariness that spoke of hard-learned survival instincts. "This is Amani," Young Hee said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "My personal assistant. She will show you to your quarters and explain the household protocols." He turned those ice-cold eyes on Indigo. "I suggest you listen carefully. Rules exist for a reason here, Mrs. Kim." He walked away, leaving Indigo alone with Amani, who waited until Young Hee disappeared up a curved staircase before speaking. "Follow me, please." Her voice was soft, accent suggesting Swahili as a first language, carefully neutral in a way that suggested practiced self-preservation. As they walked through endless corridors, Amani kept her voice low. "The house has 4 wings. You're in the south wing, guest quarters, though you're the only guest." She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Follow all rules exactly. Don't go to the East Wing under any circumstances. Don't ask questions about Mr. Kim's business. Don't speak to the security staff. And whatever you do—" She paused at a door, her hand on the handle. "Don't try to leave without permission." The room was incredible. A suite larger than Indigo's entire apartment back in Newark, with a bedroom, sitting area, and bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens. A walk-in closet held clothes in her exact size, expensive designer pieces with the tags still on. The bathroom had a soaking tub carved from a single piece of marble. It was the most beautiful prison cell Indigo had ever seen. She walked to the windows, tried to open them for air. They didn't budge, sealed shut. When she looked closer, she could see the reinforcement, security glass, thick enough to stop bullets, designed to look like ordinary windows but functioning as walls. She turned to the door and saw what Amani had been careful not to mention. The lock was electronic, positioned on the outside. The room could be locked from the hall, trapping whoever was inside. Dinner that first night was served in a dining room that could seat 30 but held only 2. Indigo sat at one end of a table that stretched like an accusation between them, Young Hee at the other. The china was hand-painted, probably antique, probably worth more than her old apartment and everything in it. The food was prepared by a private chef, Korean and French fusion, artfully plated. The kind of meal Indigo had only seen in magazines. They ate in complete silence. Young Hee watched her the entire time with those unreadable eyes, and Indigo forced herself to eat, even though every bite tasted like ash. The only sounds were silverware on china and the distant hum of the house's systems, climate control, security, the machinery of surveillance. Finally, Young Hee spoke. "Tomorrow evening, you will come to my quarters at 10 p.m. Wear what Amani provides for you. Be punctual." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command, really. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sun would rise. Indigo's throat closed. What happens then? You'll discover that tomorrow. He stood, dabbed his mouth with a napkin that probably cost $50, and walked away. Sleep well, Mrs. Kim. You'll need your strength. That night, Indigo lay in the enormous bed, surrounded by 1,000 thread-count sheets and down pillows, and couldn't sleep. The house made sounds, not the familiar sounds of home, but strange noises that set her nerves on edge. Voices speaking Korean somewhere below her, heated discussion or argument. At one point, she heard something that sounded like a woman crying, the sound distant and muffled. Cars came and went at odd hours, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., engines rumbling, doors closing, conversations she couldn't understand. She reached for her phone to call her mother just to hear a familiar voice, just to know she wasn't completely alone. But her phone was gone. In its place on the nightstand was a new one, latest model, expensive, locked with her fingerprint. She tried to dial her mother's number. This number is not available from this device. She tried Kaya. Same message. She went through every number she knew and only 3 worked. Young Hee's office, Amani's extension, and 911. She was in a beautiful cage, and someone had thrown away the key. A soft knock came at her door around midnight. Indigo opened it to find Amani standing there, looking nervous. The assistant glanced down the hall, then quickly pressed a folded piece of paper into Indigo's hand before walking away without a word. Indigo closed the door, unfolded the note. Amani's handwriting was careful, precise. I'm sorry for what's about to happen, but survival means obedience here. Don't fight him. Don't ask why. Just survive. That's all any of us can do. Indigo read it 3 times, then tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. She stood in the bathroom, looking at her reflection in the mirror, this stranger in designer pajamas in a mansion that felt like a tomb, and realized she had no idea what she'd actually agreed to. But she was about to find out. At 10 p.m. the next evening, Indigo stood outside her suite wearing the clothes Amani had laid out for her. An elegant silk dress in deep midnight blue, the kind of garment that cost more than she used to make in a month. The fabric whispered against her skin like a threat. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Amani had come to prepare her, working in silence, her eyes filled with something that looked like pity. When she'd finished, she'd squeezed Indigo's hand once, a gesture of solidarity from one captive to another, and left without a word. Now Indigo stood in the hallway, staring at the corridor that led to the East Wing, the Forbidden Wing. 2 guards were stationed at the entrance, both armed, both watching her approach with expressions that gave nothing away. When she reached them, they opened the heavy doors without speaking, and she stepped through into another world. The East Wing was different. Where the rest of the house felt like a museum, cold and lifeless, these halls had warmth, soft lighting instead of harsh fluorescence, the scent of incense, sandalwood and something floral she couldn't identify, and photographs, dozens of them lining the walls, images spanning decades, places she didn't recognize, people she'd never seen, a life documented in frames. Young Hee's private quarters were at the end of the hall. The doors opened as she approached, and she stepped inside to find a room that seemed to belong in a different house entirely. Here, finally, was evidence of human habitation, books on shelves, well-worn and read, a Korean tea service on a low table, more photographs covering every surface, and sitting on a cushion in traditional Korean hanbok, the formal attire looking almost ceremonial in the modern setting, was Young Hee. But he looked different. The cold authority was still there, but underneath it Indigo saw something she hadn't expected. Exhaustion. Pain. He looked every one of his 85 years, the mask of ageless power finally slipping to reveal the ancient, tired man beneath. Sit, Indigo. His voice was quieter here, almost gentle. He gestured to a cushion across from him. We must talk before anything else. She sat because her legs were shaking too badly to stand. He poured tea with practiced grace, the ritual seeming to calm something in him. I know what you think this is, he said, handing her a cup she didn't want. I know what you're afraid of. Indigo's voice came out hoarse. Then tell me I'm wrong. You should be afraid, he said, meeting her eyes, but not of what you imagine. He set down his own cup, and she watched his hands, those elegant, scarred hands, tremble slightly. I have no interest in your body, Mrs. Kim. No desire for intimacy. That's not why you're here. Then why? I brought you here for a reason that has nothing to do with desire. His voice hardened, ice crystallizing over whatever humanity she'd glimpsed. I brought you here because of hate. Hate? The word didn't make sense. You don't even know me. No, but I knew your mother. He stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down a photograph in a silver frame. He handed it to her with hands that shook, not from age, but from emotion barely contained. I knew her very well. Indigo looked at the photograph and felt the world tilt. A young Korean man, handsome, maybe 45, with kind eyes and an open smile she'd never seen on the face across from her, stood with his arm around a black woman who couldn't have been more than 25. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, radiant with joy. And Indigo recognized her immediately, even though she'd never seen her mother look that happy, that unguarded, that young. That's my mother. Her voice was barely a whisper. Essence Sterling. The way he said her mother's name, with such tenderness and such rage intertwined, made Indigo's skin crawl. The only woman I ever loved. The woman who destroyed me. Young Hee's story poured out like poison from a wound that had festered for 40 years. He'd met Essence in 1985, when he was 45 and building his first legitimate business, import/export, legal then, before everything went dark. She was 22, working as a secretary in a firm that did business with his company. Beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. She'd seen him as exotic, sophisticated. He'd seen her as salvation, proof that he could have a life beyond the shadows of his past. We had 5 years together, he said, his voice distant, lost in memory. Secret, yes, because her family wouldn't have understood, but real. I promised her everything. Marriage, security, a future. I was going to make it all legitimate, build something clean we could both be proud of. His voice cracked. I loved her with everything I had. What happened? Your father happened. The words came out like venom. Nathaniel Sterling, 26 years old, educated, respectable, from a good black family in Newark. Everything I wasn't. Everything I could never be. He picked up another photograph, a wedding photo. Essence in white, radiant. Nathaniel beside her, proud and handsome. Young Hee's hands shook as he held it. She chose him. Said our love was impossible, that her family would never accept a Korean man 20 years older than her, that the black community would judge her, that I was asking her to give up everything for a future that could never work. Indigo's throat closed. I'm sorry that happened, but... Sorry? His laugh was ugly, broken. Your mother took everything from me. My heart, my hope. My ability to believe in anything good. That rejection, it didn't just hurt me, Indigo. It killed something fundamental. It killed the part of me that was human. He stood, began pacing like a caged animal. So I killed something in the world. I went into the darkness I'd been trying to escape, built an empire on violence and blood, became the monster your mother feared I might be. The criminal empire, Indigo whispered. Everything. Every crime, every death, every destroyed life, it all traces back to the day Essence Sterling broke my heart. He turned those ice-cold eyes on her, and she saw the madness underneath, the obsession that had grown like cancer for 40 years. I swore that if I couldn't have Essence Sterling, I would have her blood. I've been watching your family for decades, waiting, planning, biding my time until the perfect moment of desperation. Horror flooded through Indigo's body, cold and paralyzing. So, this marriage is revenge. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, like discussing a business transaction. You are here to suffer as your mother made me suffer, to be possessed the way I was discarded. Your mother took my heart and crushed it. Now I have her daughter, and I can do whatever I want with her. He moved closer, and Indigo pressed back against the cushions. You will live in this house as my wife. You will bear my name, and every day, your mother will know that her daughter belongs to the man she destroyed. That's the revenge. That's the price she pays for what she took from me. You're insane. The words escaped before Indigo could stop them. Perhaps. He smiled. And it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. Or perhaps I'm the only sane one because I never forgot what was taken from me. Your mother moved on, had her perfect life with Nathaniel, had you and your sister, forgot all about the Korean man who loved her. But I never forgot, not for a single day in 40 years. He turned away, and for a moment, Indigo saw the shape of the man in that photograph, the one who'd smiled, who'd loved, who'd been human. But that man was dead, murdered by heartbreak and transformed into this cold, calculating monster. Welcome to your cage, Mrs. Kim, he whispered. This is where you'll stay until one of us dies. Indigo should have been terrified. Every survival instinct screamed at her to cower, to beg, to break down under the weight of this revelation. This man had orchestrated her entire life's destruction as an act of revenge against her mother. He'd purchased her like property to satisfy a vendetta 4 decades old. She was trapped in a fortress with a monster who'd just told her she was his prisoner for life. But instead, as she looked at Kim Young-hee standing there in his traditional hanbok with 40 years of hate carved into his face, what she saw was pain. Raw, bleeding, unhealed pain that had been festering since before she was born. You've been planning this for 40 years? Her voice was quiet, but steady. That's a long time to carry hate. Young-hee froze. He'd been expecting tears, begging, fear, the words he'd imagined hearing 1,000 times in his fantasies of revenge. But this calm observation threw him completely off balance. What? 40 years, Indigo repeated, standing slowly. That's longer than I've been alive. You've been carrying this hatred for longer than my entire existence. She looked around the room at all the photographs, all the evidence of his obsession. That's exhausting. You don't understand, he started, anger flashing in his eyes. My mother hurt you. I'm sorry that happened, but I'm not her. You think an apology changes anything? His voice rose, the controlled facade cracking. Your mother destroyed me. She took everything I was and left me with nothing but rage, and you think sorry makes that disappear? No, Indigo said calmly, and something in her steady tone made him pause. But holding on to this has already cost you 40 years. How much more of your life are you willing to give her? Silence filled the room like a physical presence. Young-hee stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Indigo continued, her voice still soft but carrying a weight that made him listen despite himself. You built an empire out of pain. You have power, money, fear. People bow to you in the streets. But do you have peace? Peace? The word came out like a curse. Young-hee's hands clenched into fists. Peace? What do you know about peace? You who scrubbed toilets for survival? You who were invisible to everyone who had power over you? Don't you dare lecture me about peace. I know that hate makes you sick. Indigo's voice remained steady, her eyes meeting his without flinching. I watched my father die bitter and angry, full of regrets about the life he didn't live, the choices he made. He died at 52 from stress and bitterness eating him alive from the inside. Is that what you want? To die having spent your entire life in service to one moment of rejection? Something shifted in Young Hee's eyes. This girl, this 25-year-old woman he'd brought here to break, was supposed to be afraid of him. She was supposed to cry and beg and confirm everything he believed about his power and her helplessness. But instead, she was challenging him with the kind of clarity that cut deeper than fear ever could. You were supposed to be afraid of me, he said, and his voice sounded almost lost. I am afraid, Indigo admitted. I'm terrified. You could do anything to me and no one would stop you. But I also see you. She took a step closer, and he instinctively stepped back. Not the Mafia boss, not the man everyone fears. I see the man who loved my mother and got hurt. I see someone who's been in pain for so long that he forgot what it feels like to be anything else. Don't. His voice cracked. Don't do this. Don't do what? Don't make me human again. His hands were trembling now, the teacup shaking in his grip before he set it down with a sharp clink. I've been the monster for so long. It's easier. It's safer. If I'm human again, then I have to feel everything I've spent 40 years trying not to feel. Indigo moved to the cushion and sat, not out of obedience, but out of genuine concern. Tell me about it. Not the revenge. Tell me about before. And somehow, impossibly, he did, as the night deepened and the house grew quiet around them. Young Hee's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. He told her about surviving the Japanese occupation as a child in Korea, watching his father beaten in the streets for speaking Korean instead of Japanese. About immigrating to America with nothing, building a legitimate business through brutal work only to be exploited by partners who saw him as easy to cheat because of his accent, his face, his foreignness. About meeting Essence and believing for the first time in his life that he could have something good, something pure. She made me believe I could be more than what the world told me I was, he said, his voice raw. And when she left, it confirmed everything I'd always feared, that I was never good enough, never American enough, never young enough, never anything enough. Indigo found herself speaking too, words spilling out that she'd never said aloud. About growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent, who set impossible standards no one could meet. About Nathaniel Sterling's constant disappointment, his inability to express love or approval. About the terrible relief she felt when he died, relief immediately followed by crushing guilt. He used to talk about his regrets sometimes when he was drunk, Indigo said quietly. About choices he made, women he hurt. I didn't understand then, but now. She looked at Young Hee. Maybe he couldn't love us because he never forgave himself for hurting you. Maybe my mother couldn't be fully present either because she was carrying that guilt. And you've been carrying the hate. All of you poisoned by one moment 40 years ago. Young Hee's face contorted, decades of contained emotion finally breaking through. I've become a monster, he whispered. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on suffering and blood. And for what? To hurt a dead man's daughter? To make a 25-year-old girl suffer for her mother's choices? He looked at his hands like he was seeing them for the first time. What have I done? You haven't hurt me yet, Indigo said softly. You've scared me, trapped me, but you haven't actually hurt me. You could still choose something different. After everything I've planned, After 40 years? Especially after 40 years. You've already lost 4 decades. Don't lose whatever time you have left. As dawn began to break, painting the room in soft gold light, young He looked at Indigo with something that might have been wonder. How can you offer grace to someone who planned your destruction, who brought you here specifically to make you suffer? Because someone has to break the cycle, Indigo said simply. You and my mother hurt each other. My parents hurt each other and hurt me and my sister. If I hate you for hating them, it just continues forever. Someone has to choose something different. Why not me? Why not now? Young He sat in silence for a long time, tears streaming down his weathered face. The first tears he'd shed in 40 years. And in that moment, the monster he'd built himself into began, impossibly, to remember what it felt like to be human. Days passed, and the household staff began to notice the change. Young He moved through the mansion differently now, the cold precision still there, but something softer underneath. He spoke to Indigo at breakfast instead of eating in silence. He asked questions about her mother's recovery, about Kaya's classes at Spellman, small talk that felt almost normal if you could forget the armed guards and surveillance cameras. Amani noticed first. She watched them with cautious confusion, like someone witnessing a tiger transform into a house cat and not quite trusting the transformation. The security staff exchanged glances when young He passed, sensing the shift but not understanding it. Even the cook mentioned to one of the guards that Madame, they still called him that, a gender-neutral term of ultimate respect in Korean, seemed almost peaceful lately. But Indigo knew there were still secrets. She could feel them in the house like a pulse beneath the floorboards. The East Wing held memories and confessions. But the basement held something else entirely. She'd heard young He go down there late at night, heard the heavy doors opening and closing, the electronic locks engaging with soft beeps that carried through the ventilation system. One evening after dinner, young He found her in the library, a room she'd discovered and claimed as her own refuge. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "There's something you need to see," he said quietly. "Something I've kept hidden. If you truly want to understand who I am and what I've done, you need to see it." "The basement," Indigo said. "The vault." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm, no longer the ice-cold grip from that first night outside Kim's BBQ. They descended through the mansion, past the main floors, past the staff quarters, to a level that didn't appear on any official blueprint. The stairwell ended at a door that looked like it belonged in a military installation. Reinforced steel, biometric scanner, keypad, the works. Security that could protect nuclear codes. Young He pressed his palm to the scanner, entered a 12-digit code, and submitted to a retinal scan. The locks disengaged with mechanical precision, and the door swung open on hydraulic hinges. Inside was a room that existed in stark contrast to the rest of the house. No elegant design, no aesthetic considerations, just function. File cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with codes instead of names. A massive desk held multiple monitors, showing what looked like shipping routes, financial transactions, real-time surveillance feeds, and more photographs. But these were different. Surveillance photos, evidence shots, documentation of crimes spanning decades. "This is my real empire," young He said, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. "Not the legitimate businesses everyone sees. The other operations." He opened file drawers with steady hands, showing her everything with the methodical precision of a confession. Smuggling routes through Busan, London, Sydney, luxury goods, weapons, things he didn't name but she could guess. Money laundering operations funneling millions through shell corporations. Connections to organized crime syndicates across 3 continents, photographs of young he meeting with men whose faces she recognized from news reports about international crime. "I built this through calculated violence," he said flatly. "I've ruined lives, Indigo. People have died because of orders I gave. Families destroyed because they stood in my way. I'm not redeemable." But it was the next set of files that made Indigo's blood run cold. Her father's name on a label, Nathaniel Sterling, 1983 to 1987. Young He pulled them out, and Indigo saw documents showing her father's involvement in Young He's early business ventures, financial records, signed agreements, and letters. Dozens of letters in her father's handwriting that she recognized from birthday cards and report cards. "He didn't just leave me," Young He said, his voice tight with old rage. "He stole from me, used my business connections to establish his own ventures, used my money to finance his first real estate deals. When we met, I was building something legitimate, import, export with Asian markets. Nathaniel saw opportunity. He learned everything, made connections through me, then took Essence and my business plans and left me with nothing." Indigo read the letters, and each one felt like a betrayal. Her father's words were cold, calculating, purely transactional. No affection, no respect, just a man using another man's trust for personal gain. "This is how you structure the Hong Kong deal," one letter read. "Your connections are valuable. We should leverage them more aggressively. I need you to understand who your father really was," Young He said. "Not the man who raised you, but the man who destroyed me. He took Essence because she was beautiful and young and would advance his standing in the black community. He took my business knowledge because it would make him rich. And when he had everything he needed, he discarded me like garbage. That's why you became this." Indigo gestured at the vault, at the evidence of decades of crime. "I had nothing left to lose. The legitimate business collapsed without the connections Nathaniel stole, so I went underground, built power the only way I could, through fear and violence and becoming the monster everyone assumed I already was. But there was more." Young He pulled out recent files, and Indigo saw her own face staring back at her from surveillance photos. Hundreds of them, years of documentation, her walking to work, cleaning buildings, at the hospital with her mother. Photos of Essence, of Kaya. Detailed financial records showing every debt, every payment, every desperate moment of their lives. "I was going to take everything from you, slowly," Young He admitted, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Make you dependent on me, then destroy you piece by piece. Break you the way your parents broke me. That was the plan, years in the making." "Was?" Indigo caught the past tense. Young He turned to face her, and she saw something she'd never expected in those eyes. Defeat. Not the defeat of losing, but the defeat of someone who'd won a war and realized the victory was meaningless. "I can't do it anymore. You've made me remember what I was before the hate consumed everything. And I hate that you've done this to me. I hate that you've made me feel again." His composure shattered. This man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness, who'd orchestrated revenge for 40 years, who'd become a legend of fear in the criminal underworld. He collapsed. Not physically, but spiritually. He sank against the desk, and tears streamed down his weathered face. "I want to be free of this," he choked out. 40 years of hate, 40 years of planning destruction. It's exhausting. It's killing me. But I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know how to let it go. Indigo moved to him, and without thinking, she did something that would have seemed impossible a week ago. She wrapped her arms around this man who'd planned her destruction, who'd kidnapped her into a gilded cage, who'd built his life on her family's betrayal. She held him while he wept, not the quiet, dignified tears from their first real conversation, but the raw, ugly sobbing of someone releasing decades of pain. Then let's figure it out together, she said softly, her voice steady even as she held a monster who was learning to be human again. You can't undo what's been done, but you can choose what happens next. Young He clutched at her like a drowning man clutching driftwood, and in that vault filled with evidence of his crimes, surrounded by the infrastructure of 40 years of revenge, something fundamental shifted. The cycle that had poisoned 3 lives and 2 generations finally began to break. Young He made his decision the morning after their night in the vault. Indigo found him in his office at dawn, surrounded by files and legal documents, making phone calls in rapid Korean. When he saw her in the doorway, he switched to English. I'm dismantling it, he said simply. All of it. The criminal operations, the underground connections, everything that's built on blood. I'm tearing it all down. Just like that? Indigo asked. Just like that. But his expression was grim. Though it won't be simple. You don't just walk away from the underworld. People I've done business with for decades, they won't understand. Some of them will see it as betrayal. He was right. Within a week, the threats started. Phone calls in the middle of the night, voices speaking in Korean, Mandarin, Russian, languages Indigo didn't understand, but whose menace was universal. Young He moved through the house with increased security, his guards more alert, more armed. He began selling off the legitimate businesses systematically, severing connections, paying off debts and obligations with the kind of precision that suggested he'd been planning exit strategies for years. The first attempt on his life came on a Tuesday. A car followed them back from Manhattan, and only the quick thinking of Young He's driver and the armored plating on the SUV prevented disaster. Bullets sparked off bulletproof glass, and Indigo watched Young He's face remain perfectly calm, as if assassination attempts were simply part of doing business. That night he came to her suite. You should leave, he said without preamble. Go back to your family. I'll ensure they're taken care of, but you shouldn't be here for what's coming. No, Indigo said. This isn't negotiable. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. She stood, meeting his eyes. You don't get to save me now and face this alone. That's not how this works. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, gratitude, something that might have been affection. You're stubborn. I learned from the best. Young He began transferring everything legal to Indigo's name. The legitimate businesses, the real estate holdings, bank accounts that contained money earned through lawful means, or at least money that had been laundered so thoroughly it was legally clean. If something happens to me, he explained as lawyers prepared documents in the mansion's conference room, you'll be protected. You'll have resources. Your family will never struggle again. Nothing's going to happen to you, Indigo said, but they both heard the doubt in her voice. Amani became their unexpected ally. Young He's personal assistant had been watching the transformation with careful eyes, and one evening she approached Indigo with an offer. I know all his connections, she said quietly. I've been managing his communications for 3 years. I can help navigate this if you'll protect me when it's over. Why would you help? Indigo asked. Because I'm tired too. Tired of being part of this. And if Mr. Kim can change, maybe there's hope for all of us. With Amani's help, the dismantling became more strategic. She knew which partners could be reasoned with, which ones needed to be paid off generously, which ones required delicate negotiation. The 3 of them worked late into the night, Indigo learning, Young He teaching, Amani facilitating. During those intense weeks, something unexpected happened. Young He and Indigo grew genuinely close, not romantically, but with something deeper. The bond between 2 people who'd chosen healing over hate, who'd decided the cycle of revenge ended with them. He taught her about business strategy, about reading people, about survival in a world that didn't forgive weakness. You have something I lost a long time ago, he told her one evening as they reviewed documents. the ability to see people's humanity even when they don't deserve it. Don't lose that, Indigo. It's more valuable than anything I could teach you. But as the weeks passed, Indigo noticed changes in young He that had nothing to do with the dismantling empire. He was getting weaker. A persistent cough that rattled in his chest. Weight loss that made his expensive suits hang loose. Fatigue that left him exhausted after meetings that once would have energized him. "You need to see a doctor," Indigo insisted after watching him struggle through a coughing fit. "No. Young He, I know what this is." His voice was calm, almost resigned. "My body is finally giving up. 85 years. 40 of them spent poisoning myself with rage. It catches up eventually." She forced him to the hospital anyway. The diagnosis came back within days. Stage 4 lung cancer, metastasized throughout his body. Untreatable at his age, given how advanced it was. 6 months, maybe. Possibly less. "This is my punishment," young He said, staring at the diagnosis in his hands. "No," Indigo said firmly. "This is just life. Bodies fail. We all die. What matters is how we spend the time we have left." Young He spent his final months making amends with the same systematic precision he'd once used to build his criminal empire. Anonymous donations appeared in the bank accounts of families whose loved ones had been casualties of his business. He turned evidence over to federal authorities, carefully curated information that would dismantle remaining criminal operations without implicating Indigo or anyone innocent. He met with prosecutors, made deals that would protect those who'd helped him exit the life. "I can't undo what I've done," he told Indigo one night as they sat in his quarters, the room now feeling more like a sanctuary than a shrine to revenge. "I can't bring back the people who died, but I can try to stop the cycle. Maybe that's worth something." The cancer moved faster than the doctors predicted. By month 5, young He was confined to the mansion, his body betraying him even as his mind remained sharp. Indigo stayed with him, reading to him, talking through business decisions, simply sitting in companionable silence. One evening as winter settled over Greenwich, young He took her hand. His grip was weak now, nothing like the iron control he'd once possessed. "You freed me from my prison of hate," he whispered, his voice barely audible. 40 years I spent in that prison, and in a few months you showed me the door was never locked. I just had to choose to walk through it. That's worth more than all the empires in the world." Tears streamed down Indigo's face. "You freed yourself. I just reminded you that you could." "Thank you," he said, and his eyes held a peace she'd never seen before. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, including myself. Thank you for showing me that even monsters can remember how to be human." He died 3 days later, peacefully, with Indigo holding his hand and Amani reading Korean poetry in the background. No empire, no revenge, no rage, just an old man who'd finally found peace at the end of a very long, very dark road. Young He died on a Tuesday in February, peacefully, with Indigo holding his hand and snow falling silently outside the window. His last breath was barely a whisper, and then he was gone. The man who'd built an empire on rage finally at rest. The funeral was deliberately small. Indigo insisted on it, and the few people young He had trusted in his final months agreed. No press, no spectacle, no criminals paying respects to a fallen boss. Just Indigo, Amani, Essence, who came in a wheelchair but came, Kaya, and a handful of former staff members who'd witnessed the transformation and wanted to honor the man young He had become, not the monster he'd been. They gathered at a private cemetery in Connecticut on a gray winter morning. The coffin was simple, elegant, Korean symbols carved into the dark wood. Essence wept quietly, and Indigo wondered if her mother was crying for the man who'd died, or the young man she'd loved 40 years ago, or perhaps for all the wasted years between. Indigo spoke because no one else could. Kim Young-hee was broken by hate, she said, her voice carrying across the small gathering. For 40 years, he let that brokenness define him. He built an empire on pain and revenge. He hurt people. He became the monster he thought the world wanted him to be. She paused, looking at the coffin. But in his final months, he chose something different. He chose to die in grace rather than in rage. He taught me that it's never too late to choose love over vengeance, healing over hate. That's the man I want to remember. After the service, Essence approached Indigo with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. For what I did to him. For what it cost you." "It's over now, Mom," Indigo said, embracing her mother. "The cycle is broken. We can all finally heal." The estate was sold within months. The Greenwich fortress that had been Young-hee's kingdom became someone else's problem. The criminal assets, everything that couldn't be legitimized, were turned over to federal authorities as part of Young-hee's final arrangements. Indigo kept only what was legally hers, the legitimate businesses Young-hee had transferred before his death, the clean money, enough to change her family's life and the lives of others who'd suffered as she had. During those months of settling Young-hee's affairs, something unexpected bloomed between Indigo and Amani. They'd been through trauma together, witnessed transformation together, sat vigil together through Young-hee's final days. What started as solidarity became friendship, then slowly, carefully, became something more. Amani understood what it meant to be trapped, to be invisible, to survive in a world that saw you as expendable. They healed together, and in that healing found love. 1 year after Young-hee's death, on a spring morning bright with possibility, Indigo and Amani married in a small ceremony at a community center in Newark. Essence was there, healthy now, her lupus managed with the best treatment money could buy. Kaya stood as Indigo's maid of honor, radiant in her cap and gown. She'd come straight from her Spelman graduation where she'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics. 2 weddings in 2 years, Kaya teased her sister. But this one looks a lot happier. She was right. This wedding had no armed guards, no hidden agendas, no revenge plots. Just love, simple and real, and chosen freely. Indigo used Young-hee's inheritance to establish the Sterling Foundation, named for both her father and the strength she'd found in herself. The foundation focused on helping exploited domestic workers, offering legal aid, emergency financial assistance, job training, and most importantly, dignity. She established interest-free loan programs for Black families trapped in predatory debt cycles, the same cycles that had nearly destroyed her family. She funded legal aid for trafficking victims and survivors of labor exploitation. Kaya joined a prestigious Dow Jones enterprise as a financial analyst, but spent her weekends volunteering at the foundation, using her economics degree to help families understand their options and escape debt traps. Essence's health stabilized with consistent treatment. The dialysis that had once been a death sentence became manageable routine. She volunteered at the foundation too, answering phones, talking to desperate women who reminded her of her daughter, offering hope where once there had been none. And the Greenwich estate, that fortress where Indigo had been both prisoner and catalyst for redemption, was purchased by the foundation and converted into a shelter for women escaping exploitation. The rooms that had once housed Young-hee's secrets now housed survivors. The vault where he'd kept evidence of his crimes became a resource center. The walls that had imprisoned became walls that protected. 2 years after Young-hee's death, on a cold November morning, Indigo and Amani stood at his grave. The headstone was simple. Kim Young-hee, with his dates and a single line in Korean that translated to "finally at peace." "He gave me everything by letting go of everything," Indigo said softly, her hand in Amani's. "Love isn't about possession," Amani added, squeezing her wife's hand. "It's about liberation. He finally learned that." Indigo placed flowers on the grave, white chrysanthemums, traditional for honoring the dead in Korean culture. "I forgive you," she whispered. "And I hope you forgave yourself." They stood in silence for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving the past where it belonged. Later that evening, Indigo sat at her desk in the Foundation's office, writing in the journal she'd kept since Young Hee's death. She wanted to capture the lessons, preserve the transformation, ensure that his redemption meant something beyond their small circle. "This story teaches us," she wrote, "that even the deepest hate can be transformed by unconditional compassion. Kim Young-hee spent 40 years building an empire of vengeance, becoming a monster to satisfy a wound that never healed. But in his final months, he discovered what really matters: being truly seen, truly known, and truly forgiven. Not because he deserved it, he didn't, but because someone chose to offer grace anyway." She paused, thinking about that first night outside Kim's barbecue, the terror and desperation that had driven her into Young Hee's trap. How different everything had become. "Sometimes the people who hurt us are carrying wounds we cannot imagine," she continued. "Sometimes they're so broken they can only break others. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, offering grace to those who don't deserve it is what finally sets everyone free. Young Hee freed me from poverty and debt, but I freed him from something worse, a prison of his own making, built from 40 years of hate. The cycle of revenge and pain that poisoned 3 lives and 2 generations ended not with more violence, but with a choice. The choice to see humanity in a monster. The choice to offer compassion to someone who planned your destruction. The choice to break the cycle instead of continuing it. That's the real power we have. Not the power to hurt back, but the power to choose something different. To choose healing over hate. To choose liberation over possession. To choose love over vengeance." She closed the journal and looked out the window at Newark's lights, the city where her story had begun in desperation and poverty. Now she had resources, power, the ability to help others escape the traps that had nearly destroyed her. And she had love, real love, chosen freely, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Young Hee had been right about one thing: revenge was a prison. But he'd been wrong about the lock. It was never on the outside. It had always been a choice. And in the end, with Indigo's help, he'd finally chosen freedom. The rest was just learning to live with that choice, to build something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible, to prove that redemption, real redemption, was always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. Even monsters could remember how to be human. Even hate could transform into love. Even the deepest wounds could heal. That was the victory. That was the triumph. Not the empire, not the wealth, not even survival. Love's final victory was simply this: the choice to be free.